والأخذ بالتجويد حتم لازم من لم يصحح القرآن آثم لأنه به الإله أنزلا وهكذا منه إلينا وصلا وهو أيضا حلية التلاوة وزينة الأداء والقراءة. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. Our tabi'in of the Prophet alayhi salawatu wassalam, successors and early scholars have added symbols in the Quran, as we've discussed prior, like the dots and the harakat, but now we're going to be taking more of those symbols. And the reason why these scholars and tabi'in would do this was for those who aren't masters of the Arabic language and who are not all connected to the Prophet ﷺ in a sanad where they know for a fact that they're reciting correctly. Some of us aren't receiving the Quran from a teacher, and all we have is a mushaf, a book. So these are all the symbols that you will find in the Quran that assist us in reading the Quran correctly. Now, the ones that we already should know are the fatha, kasra, dhamma, shadda, and sukoon. I won't spend too much time on it, but the fatha has the dash that goes over the letter ha, and another example, da, whereas the kasra is the dash that goes under the letter li and he, and the dhamma is the miniature waw over the letter hu and mu. And the shadda means that you double the letter, the first letter being second one taking the harakah. So in the case of the sad, we have two sads. The first one is second, the second one takes the kasra. And as for the dal, we have two dals. The first is second, the second takes the kasra. So we say adda, affa, alla, aha. This is the shadda. As for the sukoon, then it looks like the upper portion of the ha, or as they say in the mushaf, the kha, for some other reason. And sometimes the second letter won't have anything on it, and it'll not have anything on it for one of three reasons. Either it is going to be harf med, like this example and this example, so there's going to be nothing on it, or it's going to be idgham or ikhfa. There is no other reason why we wouldn't have a haraka or an actual sukoon, other than those three reasons. So these are the harakat, and you guys should already be aware of them. Now, as for the symbols in the Quran, you can screenshot this screen. This is every symbol that you will find in the Mus'haf today that assist us in our reading. So I'll give us a quick definition of all of them, and then we'll take some examples. So over here on the right side, everything in right, these are alamat al-waqf, knowing when to stop, or when you have to stop, or when you should stop. So this meme means that you must stop. And I say meme sounds like M, so I just remember must stop. Lam alif means la, which means don't or no. Don't stop. Okay? These sets of three dots means that you cannot stop on both of these sets. So you're going to have the first sets of dots on one word with the other sets of dots on another word. Do not stop on both. You can stop on one or the other, or not stop at all, but just not both. This sila means it's better to connect the ayat, but it's okay if you stop. Whereas this is the opposite. It is better to stop, but it is okay if you continue. The G means there's no change in meaning, either or. It's 50-50. And here we have a sakit, meaning while we recite, we take a small pause at this point, and we pause for less than the duration that it takes to take a breath. In these examples, these harakat, they're all dhammatain, which is a dhamma, and we add the noon sakin sound at the end of it. But they indicate to us what kind of noon sakin are we going to have there. So for example, in this first example here, we're going to be doing idhar. We're going to be pronouncing a clear noon sakin. Whereas in this example, we are not. We are going to be doing idgham or ikhfa on the noon sakin. And in this example, we're actually changing the noon sakin in the tanween to a meme sakin. All right, and the same applies for all these other harakat. So the fathatain, notice the subtle difference, how it's slightly slidden off. The same goes for the kasratain. It looks identical to the fathatain, just goes underneath the letter. And the meme. So in the first example, we'd be doing idhar, pronouncing a clear noon, sakin. Whereas in the second example, we would be doing idgham or ikhfa, And the third example, we'd be replacing that noon sakin with a mim sakin. So these harakat give you a hint as to what hukum we're doing for the noon, because the noon we have ahkam and noon. So once you guys take that lesson of ahkam and noon, you'll really appreciate this trick in the Quran even more. It really assists you and helps you. This symbol, we've taken it before. We know this is the sign that goes on top of the Hamzat al-Wasl, and we already talked about that. You guys should know what that is by now. These circles that have a subtle difference, the first is a complete circle, while the second is actually an oval. And the circle means that we do not pronounce the letter at all that it comes on top of, whereas the oval means we do not pronounce it if we continue, but we do pronounce that letter if we stop on it. This is a special symbol, and it changes from word to word. If you see this symbol, there's no way to know how to pronounce the word other than by finding a teacher who has the answer, who knows how the Prophet ﷺ used to recite this word, or how the different qira'at and qurra would recite this special word. You could think of it as an exception. Unlike everything else that has a set rule regardless of where you find it, this actually changes from word to word. This is the symbol for a med, telling us to elongate the harf med that it comes on top of, to elongate it. This is a miniature ya that we would find in some words. It's in when the words are not written with a ya, but they're pronounced with a ya. Unlike these where we had letters that are written but not pronounced, here we have letters that are pronounced but not written. So in the case of the ya, we're going to pronounce a ya. In the case of the waw, we're going to pronounce a waw. In the case of an alif, we're going to pronounce an alif. And almost always these are going to be used for mudud, for elongation, for extending. Unless this alif is found directly on top of a letter in which you would actually cancel out that letter. Anytime you have a small letter over a big letter, we pronounce the small letter and not the big letter at all. So in these 4 examples here, you're going to find those in the Quran. So we'll pronounce the small letter over the big letter. And this is a noon sakin that is going to appear in the word nunji, as we're going to see. And we pronounce it, even though it's not written. And the sin that appears over the sad, we're actually not going to pronounce the sad at all. We're going to pronounce the sin, unless the sin came underneath, in which you have an option between the two. And in that case, if it came underneath, then the sad would be muqaddam. Not really better, but it was muqaddam in the qira'at. And then the mim sakin, you are going to find it over the noon sakin, and you're going to replace the noon with the mim, or you're going to find it in our tanween as we just showed. And lastly, we have sajdat at-tilawa. This is why we perform sajda, and this is when we perform the sajda, when we get up to those verses that have these markings in the Quran. This is something called a rubu', meaning 1/4. 4 of these equals 1 hizb. 1 hizb is half of a juz'. So you have 8 of these in a juz', and it really helps you break up the Quran and make it easier to review and to read when you break it up in those kinds of portions. Okay, so without further ado, starting with these wuquf. In this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, Subhanahu an yakuna lahu walad, and we must stop. Lahu ma fi samawati wa ma fi al-ard. This ayah is saying, glory be to Allah. He's too praiseworthy to be taking a son. Pause, period. Lahu ma fi samawati wa ma fi al-ard, meaning for Allah is whatever is in the heavens and the earth. Whereas if you would have continued, it would have made it seem like for the walad, for the son, is whatever is in the heavens and the earth. And there is no son. Allah does not have a son. So we must stop here. This is very crucial. Otherwise, we're going to be giving a very bad meaning. In this example here, these sets of dots, we can stop on the first set and then continue. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, and that is fine. Or we can stop on the second set of dots and then continue. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Or I cannot stop at all. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. But what I cannot do is stop on both sets of these dots. I cannot say ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. That's one thing we will not do with those sets of dots. Here we have an example where it is better to continue, but it's okay if you stop. And these alamat for the wuquf tell us that we do not have to go back when we lose our breath. So for example, if I were to be reading this ayah and I lost my breath on the word kitab, there's no waqif here, so I need to go back. as an example, هو الذي أنزل عليك الكتاب منه آيات محكمات هن أم الكتاب وأخر متشابهات. So you see how when I lost my breath on the word kitab, I went back. Whereas when I stop on a waqif, I do not have to go back, I can just continue. So I can say, وَأُخَرُ مُتَشَابِهَاتٍ فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ, and continue in that fashion. This symbol tells me it is better to not stop and get it all in one breath for the meaning, but it is okay if you stop, you're not giving off anything, any real bad meaning. And here's the opposite. Here it's better if you do stop at this waqif, but it is okay if you continue. And we have that case where it really doesn't change the meaning at all, whether you stop or whether you continue. You're not really going to be giving a better or worse meaning whether you stop or continue. And then we have a couple examples in the Quran of the sect. So in Surah Yasin, we would read this, مَرْقَدِنَا هَذَا مَرْقَدِنَا هَذَا. So I'm pausing, but I'm not pausing as long as it takes to take a breath. So I'm not saying مَرْقَدِنَا هَذَا. That is too long of a pause. It needs to be shorter than the time it takes you to take a breath. مَرْقَدِنَا هَذَا. This is a sect. In Surah Al-Kahf, we have an example of this at the end of the ayah, which you wouldn't really use unless you're trying to connect the ayat. If I stop on عِوَجَ, I can stop and take a breath, and it's the end of the ayah, and I can continue reading from here. However, if I wanted to connect these ayat, I must do this. I must perform this sect. وَلَمْ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ عِوَجًا قَيِّمًا لِيُنذِرَ. In that fashion. We have an example in Surah Al-Haqq where you actually have the option to do the second or to perform idgham on these has. So I can say, مَا أَغْنَى عَنِّي مَالِيَهْ هَلَكَ عَنِّي سُلْطَانِيَهْ. So I showed the ha, I paused less than the duration of a breath, and then I continued. Or I could just perform idgham and just combine these and not do a sect at all. I wouldn't pause in my recitation at all. ما أغنى عني ماليه هلك عني سلطانيه. And we have an example in Surah Al-Qiyamah, وَقِيلَ مَنْ رَاقَ. Otherwise, if there was no sect, we would have performed idgham here. We would have said, وَقِيلَ مَرَّاقَ مَرَّاقَ. But we do not do that. And you see the sukoon on the noon giving you a hint that we do not do that idgham. Normally, if you had a noon sakin followed by a ra, there would be no sukoon here. It would be empty and you'd have a shadda on the ra. But you do not, inclining us to remind us, as well as the sign of the sakit, that we pause. We do that sakit there. And we have an example, جزء عام من سورة المطففين, كلا بل ران على قلوبهم. And other than that, this is all of our symbols of wuquf, knowing when to stop and how to stop. Now, as for our harakat, like we said, when you have these harakat that are not the dhammatain that are over one another like that, we know we are going to be either doing idgham or ikhfa. In this first example, we're doing idgham, and in the second example, we're doing this rule called ikhfa, which we will be taking later. So here I'm actually not pronouncing the noon sakin fully. I'm not going to say ilahun, ilahun, even though the dhammatain is supposed to make that sound. Ha dhammatain hun. But I'm not going to say that noon sakin because I know this is telling me to not say it. There's some kind of rule going on here. In this case, because of the waw, we are doing idgham. Ilahu, ilahu. So this tanween, the way it looks, gave that hint away to me. Here, same thing, but instead of idgham, we're doing ikhfa this time. Wahidun subhanah. Wahidun su. Instead of saying wahidun, we actually don't fully pronounce that noon in that case either. And another example of this with the fathatain is when you have these fathas that are not directly on top of each other. If you notice, they're not two lines that are very close. They are slightly separate and slid off of one another, inclining us to know we are doing either idgham or ikhfa. In this case, we are doing idgham. Hudal lil muttaqin, not hudan lil muttaqin. You have an example of when we do know we're doing idhar. In this case, we don't have those other dhammatain. We are going to pronounce a clear noon sakin in this example. Muhkamatun hunna. Muhkamatun. Tun. Ta. Dhammatain. Tun. With no type of idgham or ikhfa happening there. Here we have the example of the dhamma where the second one is a meme, letting us know that the noon sakin in the tanween is going to be replaced by a meme. So we don't say ghulfun, we say ghulfum, ghulfum bel when we want to continue. Here we have another example of those tanween that are not directly on top of each other. Again, telling us to do idgham or ikhfa. In this case, it's going to be idgham. حَقٍّ وَقَوْلِهِمْ. And your hint, if it wasn't tanween, again, the noon would not have a sukoon like this example. Here we have another example of the fathatain, and in this example, you get to compare the two. So here, if you pay close attention to these harakat, you see that they're different from these harakat, which are directly on top of one another. In this case, we know we are pronouncing the noon sakin clearly. Ajran hasana, where we know in this case we are not. We're going to be doing idgham or ikhfa. In this case, it's idgham. qayyiman liyundira. And the last example I'll show you of that kind of takes all of those examples and puts them into one ayah where you can see it back to back, is in Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Summun bukmun umyun fahum. So you got to see all different kinds of these dhammatain in one ayah, and you see the difference between them. Here, instead of saying summun, we said summum. We changed it to a meme. Here we are saying a clear noon sakin, bukmun, and in this case we're doing ikhfa. We're not saying a clear noon sakin, fa, and these symbols are what gave that away. So as for your harakat, that's all for the tanween. That's all you had to know for that. Now, as for these green symbols, we said this is a hamzat wasl. We've already taken it before, but just to give you two quick examples. In this case, we say as-sama. We treat it like a hamza when we start with this word. As-sama. We use it to jump on top of the scene. Whereas when we continue from the last word, we say fis-sama. We do not pronounce it as if it was a real hamza. If this was a real hamza, it wouldn't matter whether you're stopping or continuing, you'd pronounce it. But here we say fis-sama, skipping it. And also in this case, we use this hamza when we begin with this word, we say al-ard. And when we continue what comes before it, we say fil ard, skipping this hamzat al-wasl. And we're going to have an entire lesson on the hamzat al-wasl. When do I put a fatha, kasra, dhamma on this hamzat al-wasl? There's an entire tajweed lesson about that. Now, as for these sets of circles, if you will, even though one of them is an oval, I'll give you some examples that we have in the Quran. If you notice here, this is not an oval, this is a circle. So we know we do not pronounce this letter at all, ever. Same as this example here. So we say ulu, 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 not ulu, not u. This is why we do not pronounce it. We say ulu, and this alif, of course, we do not pronounce it at all either. And we have another example in this word qalu. And anytime you see this word qalu, you're going to see this alif with this circle on top, and we do not pronounce that alif at all. Again, it is written with it, but it is not pronounced. And if anyone were to ask, okay, if it's written but not pronounced, then what is the purpose of having it? Then we would simply tell them that we do not change the Quran. The Quran reached us in both written and spoken form, mutawatir, mutawatir. In both of those ways, it reached us today. So we keep it the same way it reached us, and this is the way that it is written for Lawh al-Mahfuz. In this example here, we do not have the circle anymore. We actually have an oval. As opposed to this circle, we actually have an oval. And this oval tells you that you say this alif or whatever letter it is on top of when you stop, but you do not say it when you continue to the next ayah. So here we would say if we stopped, وَأَطَعْنَا الرَّسُولَ la. You see how I extended the alif? Whereas if I continued, وَأَطَعْنَا الرَّسُولَ وَقَالُوا la وَقَالُوا, I just said the fatha without extending. I didn't say رَسُولَا وَقَالُوا. I said رَسُولَ وَقَالُوا. And the same thing in the next ayah. As-sabila, if I stop. As-sabila, if I continue. And you can see the difference between those. And this small circle, you know, it comes on other letters as well, like the ya and the wow and other letters for that matter. So that's all you really needed to know. If you wanted some other examples, you have the word lakinna that this appears on top of. This is the oval, meaning if you stopped on this word, you'd say lakinna. But if you continue to say lakinna huwa, and the same thing in the word ana, you're always going to find that oval on that word as well. Next, we have this special character which changes from case to case. So if you look at these examples that we have here, again, it changes from case to case. There's no way how you would know how to pronounce this word unless you had a teacher. This symbol is supposed to strike your curiosity, and you're supposed to ask yourself, why is there a dot under the ra? There's no word that has that. You know, I know of a dot over the ra, the za, but I don't know of a dot under the ra, and it's a thick dot. It's not like this other regular dots. So it should strike your interest, and you should go to a teacher and ask, what is this dot doing? And then you would, be informed that this is a special word where we perform, where we mil the alif. We don't say majraha the way we should pronounce this word normally. We don't say majra. We say here majreha. Majreha wa mursaha. Majreha wa mursaha in our qira'ah. So that symbol tells you to do that. We also have on the word a'jamiyun, we have another symbol, and it's not going to mean the same thing it meant the last time. Like all these other symbols, which are consistent every single time you see them, this symbol changes from word to word. So in this example, we pronounce this word a'jamiyun arabi. It's not it's not two hamzas. The second one is what is between a hamza and a ha, if you wanted to make it easy, or it's what is less than a hamza. A'jamiyun, a'jamiyun. So that symbol tells you to do that. In this example here, the word is originally ma laka la ta'manna. Ma laka la ta'manu na. That is originally the word. Arabs don't like two letters back to back, so they performed the idgham and actually took out that first noon. But we have this symbol here to tell us that there was originally a noon here. So we can do one of two things. When we get to this point, we can either make a circle with our lips, so those who are looking at us know that we are showing them that there's a noon here, that there used to be a noon here. We would say, مَا لَكَ لَا تَأْمَنَّا. And of course, through the screen, you guys can't see what I'm doing with my lips, but I'm making a circle in my lips when I get to this, when I'm holding the gunna for the noon. I say, مَا لَكَ لَا تَأْمَنْ. And as I'm holding that, man, I'm making a circle with my lips, the same way I would do with a regular dhamma or a regular wow. Excuse me. Our second option here is to actually say that noon with the dhamma, but to make it shorter than a regular dhamma. So we say the noon with the dhamma, but we make it shorter than a regular dhamma, and we lower our voice. So we would say, مَا لَكَ لَا تَأْمَنُنَا. مَا لَكَ لَا تَأْمَنُنَا. So you see how I brushed by that noon with a dhamma, and I lowered my voice. That's how you would properly pronounce this word. So that's what that symbol teaches us. And as for the mudud, we're going to have an entire lesson on the mudud and why we have the med. But just to give you some examples, we had one here. We said, subhanahu. We extended that med. We had two examples here. Ibtigha'a, wabtigha'a. This is the same word, but you have it in the word sama'a and many other examples in the Quran where you would find that med. Now, as for these miniature letters that appear over the other letters that we do pronounce, this is the ya, this is the wow, and this is the alif, like we said before. Excuse me. In this case, we have a miniature wow, which we are going to treat like a regular wow maddiya. So we're not going to just say subhanahu ayyakuna, subhanahu ayyakuna. We're going to extend with this wow, subhanahu ayyakuna, subhanahu ayyakuna. And then that med gives us an even more extension, subhanahu ayyakuna. But just to get examples without that extra extension with the med. Excuse me, I know I have more examples of that. Of the miniature letters. Oh, I'm sorry, it's in orange. Excuse me. Yeah, so here we had an example with the ya. So we don't just say تأويله وما تأويله وما. We say تأويله وما تأويله وما. We extend using this. Yeah, but if we stopped on that word, we would just say تأويله تأويله. And same thing for this word. We would say bih if we stopped, and we would say bihi if we continued extending with that yeah as if there was a regular yeah there. Same thing for the alif. We treat it as if there's an alif written there. ما تشابه ما تشابه, not just ما تشابه ما تشابه. So I extend. We have the example of this alif here where we say بآياتي بآياتي, again extending and using that alif. And we have other examples like the noon and the sad and the meme that appear over letters in which we are going to pronounce them. Like this example here, we have the word al-an with a noon, al-anbiya. We're actually going to take out that noon and replace it with a meme, al-anbiya, al-anbiya. Oh, this is my second time stopping, by the way. I forgot that about the whole syncing thing. So, sorry, work your magic. So there we would pronounce that meme as if it was written instead of the noon. Again, we don't change the writing because that's the way the Quran reached us. Here we have another example of the meme where we're not going to say min. We're actually going to take this noon out and say mim and just pronounce the letter that's on top. You always pronounce the small letter that is on top and you ignore the big letter that is underneath. So for example, in this here, we have an alif directly on top of a waw. Whenever it's directly on top, again, we do not pronounce the big letter, we pronounce the small letter. So here we're going to say as-salah, as-salata, as-salata with an alif and not pronounce the waw at all. Whereas in some examples in the Quran, when this alif is just moved over slightly, when you find it here, it's actually a different word, as-salawata, as-salawata. So there we would keep the waw, just add an alif, as-salawata. But because it is directly on top, we do not pronounce the waw at all. Here we have an example of the sin over the sad that we talked about. Again, we are going to pronounce a small letter and ignore the big letter. It's written like that, but it's pronounced differently. Okay, so that's why they added the sin to remind us that this word is pronounced with a sin, even though it's written with a sad. So we say here, yabe sutu, su-tu, not su, a heavy sad. We're not saying the sad, we're saying the light sin, su, wa yabe sutu. Another example of this would be the word bestah. We don't say bels with a sad, we say bes with a sin, bestah. And in the example where you have the sin underneath the sad, we said when it's over, you replace the big letter, but here it's underneath. Here, you actually have the option to say either or, and they're both correct. You could say musaytirun with the ta, with the sad, or you can say musaytirun with the sin. They're both correct. Again, the sad is muqadda, meaning it came first in the qira'at, but it doesn't mean that it's better than the other. If we have two qira'at, Maliki and Maliki Yawmiddin, one is not better than the other. They're both from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're both revelation, and we have to believe in all of them. In this example, we actually have a noon that is not written, but it is pronounced. So here we don't just say nuji, we say nunji, and we treat it as if there was a noon sakin that was written there. Nunji. And did we have one more? Yeah, so these are all our examples of the miniature letters that appear for us. So finally, our sajdat al-tilawa, when you see this overline, it is not an underline, it is an overline, excuse me, that appears over the word. Here we know this is why we're performing the sajda, this is why we're doing it, and this is when we perform the sajda. And again, we talked about this being the sign for the arba', the ruba'. So for a couple examples of the sajda, and you have 15 of these that appear in the Quran. Here it says in Surah, in Juz' Amma, when we get to Surah Al-Inshiqaq, you're going to have to perform this. وَإِذَا قُرِئَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْقُرْآنُ لَا يَسْجُدُونَ. Why do we perform sajda? Because they لا يسجدون. They do not perform sajda, so we are going to perform sajda. When do we do it? Right at the house, which it happens to be on the same word. So the reason and when it happens to be on the same word, but that's not always the case. You see here, it was a word behind. Here, كَلَّا لَا تُطِعْهُ وَاسْجُدْ وَقْتَرِبْ. Why are we making sajda? Because Allah commanded us here, wasjud, to perform sajda. When do we perform it? Do we perform it right away? Do we go down here? No, we read this extra word to finish the ayah. وَقْتَرِبْ. And if you're in your prayer and you get to this ayah, you go down, you perform sajda. And then you stand all the way back up to your standing, skipping the ruku' and everything else. You drop into sajda, you perform sajda at-tilawa, and you stand back up. If you notice in this case, this is the end of the surah. So you'd actually continue by reading the next surah. And in some examples, you actually have the reason, an ayah before when you actually perform the sajda. So here it says, وَلِلَّهِ يَسْجُدْ. That's why we are performing the sajda. وَلِلَّهِ يَسْجُدُ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. To Allah, everything that is in the heavens and the earth performs sajda, prostration to. So we are going to do that as well, but we don't do it until we come all the way to the actual symbol that looks like a house. That's when we would perform that sajda. Okay, and then finally we talked about the symbol. When you see this in the Quran, and some Qurans look different, you know that you just completed 1/4 of a hizb, or 1/8 of a juz. You're going to find 8 of these in a juz'. You're going to find 4 of these in a hizb, which is half of a juz'. And with that, walhamdulillah, we conclude, and now you know every single symbol that is in the Quran. So if I open up to this random page, you are going to know these are harakat, that is a med, this is a sukoon. You're going to know that this doesn't have anything on it because it's either idgham, ikhfa, or it's a harf med. I know it's not an alif, waw, or ya, so it's not a harf med. You know, when you take your ahkam nun, you'd realize this is an ikhfa, that's why it's there. You know this is a sukoon, you know this is a shadda, which means there's 2 lams. The first one takes the sukoon, the second one takes the haraka. You start knowing about why is this harakat look like this and not directly on top of each other. It's because I'm not going to be fully pronouncing this noon. I'm going to be jumping here and doing idgham. You know about this med here, that squiggly line means to elongate. We say nuhi ilayhim. We extend like that, very long. We know about this, again, another med. We know about this circle means we're not pronouncing that alif at all. Some more examples, you know about this waqif, and this waqif here, it means it's better to continue, but it's okay if you stop. Here it means it's better to stop, but it's okay if you continue. And again, like you're going to start knowing a lot of these symbols, alhamdulillah, after taking this lesson. Here, you know, we have an overline. Why am I making the sajda? When I'm performing the sajda, my ruba' is over here, you know, and we have the miniature letters. So, bi'idhnillah, after this, you'd find the Quran a lot easier, knowing all the symbols, and know you're not expected to memorize all of them from one lesson, but at least now you know where to turn. When you come across a symbol, something you don't know, you can refer back to this video. بارك الله فيكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك